She can't explain how she fell for the ugly millionaire. That was exactly what Helen Zimmerman was thinking as she watched this tall, gangly man who was completely outside society's beauty standards explain how artificial intelligence could revolutionize education in underserved communities. He gesticulated wildly, his glasses slipping down his nose, and his tie looked like it had been knotted by a 5-year-old. But there was something hypnotic about the way his words came out, precise, cutting, loaded with genuine passion that made everyone in the audience fall silent to listen. Helen hadn't come to the Technology and Social Impact Seminar at Case Western Reserve University to fall in love. She had come to work, armed with her notepad recorder and that professional skepticism that had accompanied her through 15 years of journalism. But there she was, completely disarmed, watching Gavin Maxwell as if he were a fascinating puzzle she needed to decipher. "The question isn't whether technology will change the world," he said, adjusting his glasses for the 10th time in 5 minutes. "The question is whether we'll let it change for the better, or if we'll keep pretending that algorithms don't have social bias." A dramatic pause. "Because let's face it, we already have too many people pretending they don't see the obvious." Helen mentally noted, first sign this man isn't normal. He makes jokes about algorithms, and the audience actually laughs. She herself smiled, which was concerning, because Helen Zimmerman didn't smile easily at tech speakers. Usually they bored her with empty corporate jargon and poorly made PowerPoint presentations. When the lecture ended, she headed to the stage with the naturalness of someone who had been doing this for years. Gavin was shutting down his laptop, completely oblivious to the buzz of compliments around him. "Excuse me?" Helen approached. "I'm Helen Zimmerman from Perspectives magazine. Could I talk with you for a few minutes about your educational foundation?" Gavin looked at her over his glasses, and for the first time she noticed he had warm brown eyes, almost golden. "Are you the journalist who wrote that piece about the security flaw in our system?" Oh, shit. Helen tried not to show her embarrassment. 2 weeks earlier, she had published an investigative article about vulnerabilities in a major tech company's systems. She didn't know it was about Gavin's Maxwell tech. "That's me," she replied, lifting her chin. "I hope that's not a problem." "Problem?" Gavin let out a rough laugh that caught her off guard. "It was the best thing that happened to me in months. My security team finally stopped thinking they were infallible. Second sign, this man isn't normal. He thanks people for public criticism." "So, about the interview," insisted Helen. "There's a coffee shop next door. We can talk there if you want to avoid the circus." He gestured vaguely at the group of students and professors still watching them. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small, cozy cafe, with Gavin trying to explain why he wanted to create an educational foundation, and Helen trying to understand why she couldn't stop noticing the peculiar way he held his cup, as if it was something precious that could break at any moment. "My father thinks I'm wasting money," Gavin said, stirring his coffee absently. "He'd prefer if I ran for political office. More prestige, less risk of, as he puts it, making a fool of yourself with poor people's stuff. And do you agree with him?" "I agree that I make a fool of myself frequently," he replied, with that crooked smile that was starting to completely disarm Helen's professional defenses. "I just disagree about helping kids from underserved communities being a waste of time." Third sign, this man isn't normal. He has principles and a sense of humor at the same time. The conversation flowed naturally. He talked about inclusive algorithms. She talked about the importance of investigative journalism. He mentioned his cat Fibonacci. She told him about her grandmother who lived with her. When Helen looked at her watch, it was already 2 in the afternoon. "I need to go," she said, starting to put away her recorder. "Thank you for the interview." "Helen," Gavin called when she was already standing, "would you like to see Maxwell Tech? It might be interesting for your story about the foundation." She should have said no, should have maintained professional distance. But there was something in the hesitant way he made the invitation, as if he expected a no, that made her agree. "Sure. When would be convenient?" "Tomorrow at 3 p.m.? Perfect. As she walked to her car, Hallen couldn't get Gavin's rough laugh out of her head, and the way he talked about education with his eyes shining. She was used to confident, charming men who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. Gavin was the opposite of all that, and for some incomprehensible reason, that intrigued her deeply. How does someone fall in love with a man who wears 90s ties and makes jokes about math? She thought, starting the car. She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out. The next day, Hallen arrived at Maxwell Tech at 2:45 because arriving exactly on time showed too much interest, and being late was rude. The company headquarters was in a modern building in downtown Cleveland, all glass and steel, but with architectural details that escaped the cold corporate standard. Vertical gardens, a fountain in the lobby, and to her surprise, a Georgia O'Keeffe painting in the reception area. Miss Zimmerman, a blonde woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed and with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, approached. Brenner Stewart, Maxwell Tech's communications director. Gavin asked me to receive you. First red flag. She didn't say Mr. Maxwell. She said Gavin with an intimacy that sounds possessive. It's a pleasure, Brenner. Wasn't he available? Oh, he is. But I preferred to give a brief presentation of the company first. You know how it is. Journalists sometimes misinterpret things. The cold smile remained unchanged. Hallen felt her muscles tense. 15 years in the profession had taught her to identify when someone was trying to control her narrative. I understand. And what kind of misinterpretation should I avoid? Nothing major. It's just that Gavin is peculiar. Sometimes he says things that might sound strange out of context. And the foundation is still in the planning phase, so you'd prefer I don't write about it yet? That's not it. The answer came too quickly. We just think it's better to contextualize everything properly, for the good of the company and Gavin's image. Second red flag. She's more worried about his image than he is. Brenner, can I talk to her now? Gavin's rough voice interrupted the conversation. He appeared coming from the elevator, wearing an MIT t-shirt under his blazer and a slightly irritated expression. Or are you planning to give a course on how to deal with dangerous journalists? I was just, Brenner began, being overprotective, as always. Gavin turned to Hallen. I apologize for this. Brenner sometimes thinks him incapable of speaking in public without causing an international disaster. I can see why, Hallen replied, noticing how embarrassment made Gavin nervously adjust his glasses. That MIT shirt under the blazer is clearly a sign of dangerous rebellion. Gavin looked at his own clothes and smiled. You haven't seen what I wear to board meetings yet. Gavin, Brenner tried to intervene. Brenner, please. I survived 15 years of Maxwell family meetings. I think I can handle a civilized conversation. He turned to Hallen. Shall we? I promise not to reveal any apocalyptic corporate secrets. As they went up in the elevator, Hallen discreetly observed the man beside her. Today he seemed more at ease, less formal than at the seminar. There was something in the way he had dismissed Brenner that revealed a more assertive personality than she had imagined. Sorry about Brenner, said Gavin when the doors closed. She's excellent at what she does, but she has a tendency to treat me like I'm an irresponsible teenager about to post something compromising on Twitter. And do you? My Twitter account has 8 followers, 3 of whom are family members, and 1 is my cat. Your cat has Twitter. Fibonacci has a much more active social agenda than I do. Gavin's office was a fascinating mix of high-tech and personal coziness. 3 huge monitors shared space with stacks of books, a professional coffee machine, and several plants that clearly received more attention than the decor. On the desk, a photo of an orange cat sleeping on top of a keyboard. Is this Fibonacci? Asked Hallen, picking up the photo. In his most productive pose, Gavin served coffee in 2 mugs that had mathematical equations printed on them. He has a special talent for lying down exactly on top of whatever I'm trying to do. Cats are like that. They have their own sense of priorities. They talked for 2 hours. Gavin spoke about the foundation with a passion that made his eyes shine, gesticulating animatedly as he explained how he wanted to use technology to democratize education. Halin found herself asking questions that went beyond the professional, genuinely interested in his ideas. "Why education?" she asked at one point. "You could invest in anything." Gavin was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with his glasses. "My father always said education is for poor people who don't know how to make real money. Maybe I'm doing this to prove he's wrong, or maybe because I believe intelligence shouldn't be a privilege for those born in the right place." Fourth sign: this man isn't normal. He admits vulnerabilities without trying to impress anyone. "And does your family support the project?" "My sister Emily thinks it'll become an easy target for scammers. My father thinks I'm wasting political opportunities. And my ex-fiancée—" He stopped abruptly. "Your ex-fiancée?" "Charlotte. She has very firm opinions about how I should use my money, especially about how I should use it on her." There was something in the way he said it that made Halin suspect the story was more complicated. But before she could ask anything else, the door opened without ceremony. "Gavin, darling!" A blonde, tanned and impeccably dressed woman entered as if she owned the place. "We need to talk about—" "Oh!" She stopped when she saw Halin. "I didn't know you had company." "Charlotte." Gavin's voice immediately became tense. "This is Halin Zimmerman, journalist. Halin, Charlotte Pemberton." Charlotte extended her hand with a smile that managed to be dazzling and cutting at the same time. "What a pleasure to meet you. Gavin didn't mention he'd be giving interviews." "It's about the educational foundation," Halin replied, noticing how Charlotte positioned herself deliberately between her and Gavin. "Ah, yes, his little charity project." Charlotte laughed, a crystalline and slightly deprecating laugh. "I always found it adorable how Gavin wants to save the world. So idealistic." "Charlotte," Gavin's voice carried a warning. "What?" "It's true. You've always been like this since we met. Remember when you wanted to build a laboratory for children in your backyard?" Fifth sign: this man isn't normal. He wanted to build laboratories for children, and the ex-fiancée treats it as a flaw. Halin observed the dynamic between the two. Charlotte spoke to Gavin as if he were a brilliant but naive child. Gavin visibly retreated in her presence, as if he became insecure again. "Well," Halin stood up, "I think I've taken up enough of your time." "You don't need to leave because of me," said Charlotte, but there was barely disguised satisfaction in her voice. "Halin, wait." Gavin also stood up, clearly embarrassed. "About the story. I'll write something interesting," she assured him, grabbing her purse. "Thank you for the conversation." In the elevator, going down alone, Halin tried to organize her thoughts. There was something about Gavin Maxwell that intrigued her deeply, a combination of brilliant intelligence, genuine vulnerability, and peculiar humor that she had never encountered before. But there were also Charlotte Pemberton and Brenna Stewart, two women who clearly saw Halin as a threat. A threat to what exactly, she wondered. Reaching her car, she received a message on her phone. "Gavin, sorry about the abrupt ending. Charlotte sometimes shows up unannounced. If you want to continue the conversation about the foundation, I'm available. No interruptions this time." Helene looked at the message for a long moment. The sensible thing would be to maintain professional distance, write the story, and move on. But there was something in the polite hesitation of the message, in the way he apologized for things that weren't his fault, that made her type. "How about a neutral place? I know an art gallery that serves excellent coffee. Tomorrow at 4? The response came almost immediately. "Perfect, as long as it's not a trap to make me appreciate conceptual art." Halin smiled, putting away her phone. Sixth sign: this man isn't normal. He's afraid of conceptual art. And for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to the next day. The Cultural Space Gallery was located in the heart of Cleveland's Arts District, in a carefully restored 1920s house that housed exhibitions by local artists and a cafe that served the best cinnamon rolls in the region. Halin arrived first, and chose a table in the back, away from the entrance traffic, where they could talk without interruptions. Gavin appeared at exactly 4:00, clearly uncomfortable with the artistic environment. He looked at the abstract paintings on the walls, as if they were complex equations he needed to decipher. "Is it safe to sit here without interpreting deep symbolism in anything?" he asked, taking off his blazer. "I promise not to make critical analyses of your way of holding a coffee cup," replied Hallin. "Great, because I hold cups in notoriously non-artistic ways." They ordered coffee and lemon pie, and Hallin noticed how Gavin seemed more relaxed away from the corporate environment. Without the formalities of the office and away from Brenner or Charlotte's interference, he spoke more naturally about his projects and ideas. "You can ask about Charlotte if you want," he said suddenly, cutting a piece of pie. "I know yesterday's situation was strange. It's none of my business. Maybe not, but she'll probably try to contact you. It's what she does when she thinks someone is interfering in her life." Interfering in her life. Interesting choice of words. "Did you break up long ago?" 6 months, but Charlotte has difficulty accepting when something doesn't go the way she planned. Gavin sighed. "She's used to being the center of attention, and I'm not exactly the type of man who attracts attention for obvious reasons." Hallin studied him for a moment. "You have a very deprecating view of yourself." "You've seen me, Hallin. I'm not the type who appears on magazine covers." "Not everyone needs to appear on magazine covers to be interesting." Charlotte would disagree. She was always suggesting improvements. Personal trainer, dermatologist, style consultant. He laughed humorlessly. "I think deep down, she thought I was a personal renovation project." "And why did you stay together so long?" Gavin was quiet, fidgeting with his spoon. "Because it was easier than admitting I deserved something better, and because my family adored her. Charlotte knew exactly how to be the perfect daughter-in-law for the Maxwells." "But you broke up." "I broke up. She didn't exactly accept it." Before Hallin could ask anything else, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hi, I'm Charlotte Pemberton. We met yesterday at Gavin's office. I'd love to talk to you about the story you're doing. I have some information that might be interesting. Kisses." Hallin showed the message to Gavin, who closed his eyes with an expression of pure exhaustion. "As I said, she doesn't accept when something doesn't go her way. And what do you think she wants to tell me? Probably that I'm a socially inadequate recluse who will end up embarrassing anyone who associates with me professionally." Gavin took off his glasses and massaged his forehead. "Or that the foundation is a ridiculous idea that will end in scandal." "And is it? Socially inadequate?" "Probably. Ridiculous." "I hope not." Hallin observed the genuine frustration on his face and felt an unexpected pang of protection. There was something deeply irritating about the way Charlotte, and apparently Gavin's family, treated his ambitions as childish whims. "Gavin," she said, leaning slightly forward, "can I ask a personal question?" "You can." "Why do you care so much about other people's opinions of you?" He looked at her surprised, as if no one had ever asked that before. "My father always said I was too smart for my own good, and not smart enough to make a good impression. I guess I internalized that." "That's a shame, because you make a very interesting impression." "Interesting in the sense of curious as a sociological phenomenon?" "Interesting in the sense of genuine, and that's rarer than you imagine." Gavin looked at her with an expression Hallin couldn't completely decipher. Surprise mixed with something that seemed dangerously close to hope. "Hallin," he said, hesitating, "would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Not for the story, just because I'd like to continue this conversation." She should have said no. Every professional instinct screamed to maintain distance, especially with a problematic ex-fiancé and a controlling communications director, clearly willing to complicate any personal involvement. But there was something in the hesitant way he made the invitation, as if he expected a refusal, that made her ignore prudence. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that." The smile that spread across Gavin's face was so genuine and surprised that Hallin felt something stir in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. "Great. I know a small place, Italian. where they make a lasagna that, well, it's hard to explain without sounding like a restaurant review. I love lasagna that's hard to explain. They talked for another hour about books, movies, places they had traveled. Gavin had curious opinions about everything. He thought superhero movies were allegories about tax syndrome, that classical music was the ideal soundtrack for programming, and that traveling to overly photographed places was a form of lazy tourism. I prefer cities that no one posts on Instagram, he explained, places where you have to discover for yourself what's interesting. And what was the most interesting place you discovered? A bookstore in Prague that also sold antique musical instruments. I spent 3 hours there talking to the owner about the relationship between mathematics and music. Seventh sign, this man isn't normal. He thinks bookstores that sell instruments are the height of adventure. When they said goodbye, Gavin hesitated for a moment before kissing her cheek, a gesture so cautious and respectful that Halin found herself wishing he were a little less polite. On the way home, she tried to organize the whirlwind of thoughts. Gavin Maxwell was everything she usually avoided in men: insecure, complicated, with evident emotional baggage. But he was also intelligent in a way that challenged her, kind without being sappy, and had a peculiar way of seeing the world that she found refreshing. And there was something else, a feeling that he really saw her, not just as another person trying to impress or use. Careful, warned the voice of reason in her head. You're starting to care about him. But for the first time in a long time, Halin decided to ignore the voice of reason. Arriving home, she found her grandmother Martha waiting in the living room with tea and cookies, clearly prepared for an interrogation. So, said the elderly woman, with that mischievous glint in her eyes, how was the work interview that lasted 4 hours? How do you know how long it lasted? Because you left at 2 and just got home at 7. And because you have that look. What look? The same look I used to have when your grandfather took me swing dancing. Halin threw herself in the armchair next to her grandmother. Grandma, I think I'm in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves a completely inappropriate man who makes jokes about algorithms and has a cat named Fibonacci. Grandma Martha smiled, serving tea. Oh, my dear. That's the best kind of trouble there is. The Italian restaurant Gavin had chosen was exactly the type of place Halin loved. Small, cozy, with walls full of black and white photos, and the unmistakable smell of garlic and basil in the air. He was waiting for her at a corner table, wearing a blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and, to her surprise, jeans. You're casual, she observed, sitting down. I thought I should try something different. My sister Emily always says I wear funeral clothes at inappropriate occasions. And how are you feeling outside your executive uniform? Like him pretending to be a normal person. He smiled self-ironically. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Dinner started relaxed. They ordered red wine, shared a bruschetta appetizer, and talked about random things, from Fibonacci's obsession with sleeping on keyboards to Grandma Martha's conspiracy theories about product quality at the supermarket. Grandma Martha sounds like quite a character, said Gavin, cutting a piece of the lasagna that really was hard to describe. Perfect layers of pasta, sauce, and cheese that melted in your mouth. She is, and she has very firm opinions about my love life. Ah, Gavin seemed slightly embarrassed. And what's her opinion about this? She said I have the look of someone who went swing dancing with Grandpa. Is that good or bad? Considering they were married for 50 years? I'd say it's concerning. They laughed, but there was an underlying tension in the conversation. Both knew this was no longer a professional interview, but neither seemed willing to name exactly what was happening. Halin, Gavin said, becoming more serious, I need to tell you something about Charlotte. You don't need to. I do, because she'll probably appear in your life more intensely. As if they had summoned her, Halin's phone buzzed. Another message from Charlotte. Darling, we still haven't managed to meet. How about lunch tomorrow? I'm sure you'd love to hear some little stories about Gavin. Kisses. Halin showed the message to him. Gavin sighed deeply. She's doing this because you went to Maxwell Tech. Charlotte has radar for any woman who gets close to me. And why does that bother her so much? You broke up. Because Charlotte doesn't end relationships. She temporarily suspends them. Gavin drank a sip of wine. In her mind, her property until further notice. That's a bit disturbed. It's very disturbed, but it's also effective. Most women give up when they find themselves dealing with an ex-fiancé who acts like she's still current. Hallin looked at him directly. Not most women. I noticed. His smile was small but genuine. But there's more. More what? Charlotte has some information about me that she might use if she feels I am moving on definitively. Hallin's stomach tightened. What kind of information? My father, a few years ago, got involved in a financial scandal. Nothing illegal, but ethically questionable. It involved public education funds that were redirected to profitable private projects. Gavin nervously fidgeted with his napkin. Charlotte found out because she was working in political consulting at the time. She never used the information, but she also never forgot it. And if she makes this public, it could affect your foundation. Exactly. Who's going to trust an educational foundation run by the son of the man who diverted education funds? Hallin was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're getting into. And because, he hesitated, because for the first time in a long time, I'd like someone to stay. Even knowing the complications, there was something so vulnerable in the confession that Hallin felt her heart tighten. She reached across the table and touched his hand, a simple gesture that made Gavin look at her with surprise. Gavin, she said calmly, everyone has complicated family. And psychotic ex-girlfriends aren't your exclusive problem. Have you had psychotic ex-boyfriends? I once dated an actor who pretended to have leukemia to stop me from breaking up with him. My God! He even shaved his head to give more realism to the performance. And how did you find out? He forgot to turn off his phone's location, and I saw he was at a party in Miami while supposedly doing chemotherapy. Gavin let out a genuine laugh. That makes me feel better about my emotional baggage. The point is, do you want to let fear of complications determine your choices? No, he replied, intertwining his fingers with hers. I don't. They finished dinner talking about future plans, favorite books, and Fibonacci's strange ability to always appear in Gavin's video conferences at the most inappropriate moment. When he walked her to her car, there was a different tension in the air, the mutual awareness that this was turning into something significant. Hallin, said Gavin, stopping beside her car, can I kiss you? The question, asked with that old-fashioned politeness and genuine hesitation, completely disarmed her. Instead of answering, she stepped closer and kissed him first. A soft but determined kiss that made Gavin sigh against her lips, as if it was something he had been waiting for a long time. When they separated, he looked at her with an expression of amazement that was simultaneously adorable and devastating. That was, he began. Unexpected? She suggested. Perfect. On the way home, Hallin turned on the radio and allowed herself to smile without reservations for the first time in months. There was something about Gavin Maxwell that made her feel like it was possible to be completely herself, sarcastic, intelligent, independent, without having to soften the edges so as not to scare anyone. But when she got home, she found 5 missed calls from Charlotte and a formal email from Brenner Stewart requesting a conversation about ethical guidelines for journalistic coverage of executives. And the war begins, she thought, putting away her phone. The next morning, Hallin woke up with a strange feeling of anticipation and apprehension. She had a story to finish about Gavin's foundation, but she also had to decide how to deal with Charlotte and Brenner. She was having coffee in the kitchen when her grandmother appeared, already completely dressed and made up at 7 in the morning. "Grandma, where are you going so dressed up?" "I'm going to meet this boyfriend of yours." "He's not my boyfriend, and you're not meeting anyone." "Of course I am. I called his company, spoke with the secretary, explained that I was your grandmother and that I'd like to meet him." Grandma Martha adjusted her purse with absolute naturalness. He seemed very polite on the phone. "Grandma, you can't just—" "I can, and I already did. At 78, I don't have time for subtleties." She kissed her granddaughter's forehead. "And relax. I promise not to tell any embarrassing stories about when you were little." "All your stories are embarrassing." But Grandma Martha had already left, leaving Hallin alone with a cup of coffee and the absolute certainty that her life had officially spiraled out of control. An hour later, her phone rang. It was Gavin. "Your grandmother is interesting," he said, and she could hear the amusement in his voice. "For God's sake, what did she say?" "That you talk about me when you think she's asleep, that you have terrible taste in men in general, but that I seem different from the other disasters." A pause. "And that if I hurt you, she knows places to hide bodies." "Oh my God, she also said you're falling in love with me, but you're afraid to admit it because I'm outside your usual type." Hallin closed her eyes, mortified. "I'm going to kill her." "Hallin?" "Yes." "Is she right?" The question caught her off guard. She could lie, deflect, make a joke, but there was something in his voice, a genuine vulnerability, that made her answer honestly. "Maybe," she admitted. "And you? Are you falling in love with me?" "I already have," he replied simply. "Actually, I think it started when you smiled at my algorithm joke." Hallin's heart did a somersault. "Gavin, I know it's complicated. I know there's Charlotte and Brenna and my dysfunctional family and the fact that I'm socially inadequate most of the time. You're not socially inadequate, you're genuine. And that's scary for people used to facades. Even so, I understand if you want to back away." "I don't want to back away." The answer came faster and more determined than she expected. "But I also don't want to be naive. Charlotte and Brenna are clearly going to try to complicate things. And if they do, then we deal with the complications." Hallin took a deep breath. Together. The silence on the other end was full of tangible relief. "Hallin?" "Yes?" "Your grandmother asked if I'm going to take you to meet my family." "And what did you answer?" "That first I need to make sure you survive meeting my ex-fiancé." They laughed, but both knew that Charlotte Pemberton was going to give up easily. And when Hallin's phone rang again, 20 minutes later, with a message from Charlotte herself, scheduling an essential lunch to discuss urgent matters about Gavin, she knew the real war was just beginning. The restaurant Charlotte had chosen for lunch was exactly the type of place Hallin expected. Expensive, trendy, full of beautiful people taking photos of their food. Charlotte was already there when she arrived, impeccably dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than Hallin's monthly salary, with perfect blonde hair and a smile that managed to be dazzling and predatory at the same time. "Hallin!" What a joy to finally get together. Charlotte stood up to kiss her cheek in a theatrically warm gesture. "You look lovely. I adore your authentic style." First jab in less than 30 seconds. Impressive. "Thank you for inviting me, Charlotte." Hallin sat down, maintaining her polite smile. "You said you had something important to discuss." Yes, but let's order first, shall we? The quinoa salad here is divine, very healthy." Charlotte opened the menu with studied gestures. "You must take very good care of your diet being a journalist. Such a stressful profession, right?" They ordered, Charlotte the quinoa salad, Hallin a shrimp risotto out of pure rebellion, and for the first 15 minutes, Charlotte gave a monologue about her career as an influencer, her female empowerment projects, and her post-relationship self-discovery journey. "You know," she said, finally getting to the point, "Gavin is a very special person. We had something very deep, very intense." "I imagine," replied Hallin, cutting a shrimp. "It's just that, he's so sensitive, so vulnerable. Sometimes I worry about the people who approach him." Charlotte tilted her head with an expression of false concern. "You know how it is. Men like him are easy targets for opportunists." Second jab. This one was less subtle. "Opportunists? Oh, I'm not talking about you, of course." Charlotte laughed, touching Hallin's arm in a condescending gesture. "It's just that. Well, journalists sometimes are more interested in the story than the person, aren't they?" "Depends on the journalist," replied Hallin calmly. "And the person." "Exactly. And Gavin is so, how can I put it, naive when it comes to women. He always believes people have good intentions. Hallin drank a sip of water, watching Charlotte try to find the perfect angle for attack. It was fascinating, in a disturbing way, to see someone be so calculatedly destructive while maintaining a facade of loving concern. "Charlotte," she said finally, "it'll be direct. What exactly do you want to tell me?" Charlotte's smile wavered for a fraction of a second before returning, brighter than before. "I just want you to know that, well, Gavin and I have a history that didn't exactly end." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Actually, we're trying to work things out." "Oh," Hallin kept her expression neutral. "Did he mention this?" "Gavin is very discreet about our personal life. Always has been." Charlotte picked at her salad, avoiding Hallin's gaze. "But between us, well, some things are hard to get over, you know." "What kind of things?" "Intimacy, real connection, shared history." Charlotte leaned forward. "And of course there's the matter of physical compatibility." "Ah, so this is how she's going to play it." "I see," said Hallin, with a calm that surprised herself. "It's just that. I don't want you to get hurt, dear. Gavin is wonderful, but he has specific needs, and after years together I know exactly how to satisfy him." The embarrassment in Charlotte's voice was clearly fabricated, but the message was crystal clear. "I have something you'll never have." Hallin finished her risotto calmly, letting Charlotte wait for a reaction. When she finally spoke, her voice was perfectly controlled. "Charlotte, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear. If you have all this history and intimacy, and if you're trying to work things out, why are you here trying to convince me to give up on him?" Hallin tilted her head with genuine curiosity. A woman confident in her relationship wouldn't need this conversation, would she? For the first time, Charlotte looked genuinely surprised. She blinked several times, clearly trying to reformulate her strategy. It's just that I don't want unnecessary drama." "Or maybe," continued Hallin softly, "you know he's moved on, and you're trying to create problems because you can't accept it." Charlotte's face hardened for an instant, before returning to the mask of sympathy. "Hallin, dear, I think you don't understand the situation." Her voice gained a sharper edge. "Gavin may seem interested now, but he always comes back to me. Always. Because I know his secrets, understand his family's complications, know how to handle certain delicate situations." "What situations?" Charlotte smiled, and this time there was nothing warm in the expression. "His father, for example. Reginald Maxwell made some questionable choices in the past, involving public money. I imagine how embarrassing it would be if that became public right at the launch of Gavin's educational foundation." "Ah, we've reached the core of the matter." "Are you threatening me?" asked Hallin, genuinely curious. "In protecting you from scandal, embarrassment, inevitable disappointment when he goes back to where he belongs." Hallin called the waiter and asked for the check, maintaining eye contact with Charlotte. "You know, Charlotte, you're right about one thing. Gavin is sensitive and vulnerable, but you're wrong about what that means." She grabbed her purse, preparing to leave. "That doesn't make him an easy target. That makes him someone who deserves to be protected from people who confuse manipulation with love." "You don't know who you're messing with," said Charlotte, the mask finally falling completely. "Actually," replied Hallin, standing up, "I think I know exactly." Leaving the restaurant, Hallin felt a mixture of anger and determination. Charlotte had shown her cards, emotional blackmail, veiled threats, and the classic attempt to make another woman feel inferior. But there was something else. Something Charlotte perhaps didn't realize she had revealed. She was desperate. On the way to her car, Hallin's phone rang. It was Gavin. "How was lunch with Charlotte?" he asked, and she could hear the tension in his voice. "Educational," she replied. "She explained that you're trying to reconcile and that I should give up on you before your father's scandal destroys my career." Silence on the other end. "Gavin? I'm here, just processing the fact that she actually said that. And she also insinuated that she has certain intimate skills that I could never match." "My God! The question is there anything I should know about this reconciliation attempt?" "Hallin, His voice became serious. There is no reconciliation attempt. There's only an ex-fiancé who refuses to accept it's over and who's apparently willing to lie and threaten to get what she wants. And what does she want exactly? Control. Charlotte never wanted a relationship with me. She wanted access to my life, my money, my influence, and mainly, she wanted to have power over me. Halin stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, processing not just the words, but the tone. There was a new clarity in Gavin's voice, as if he were finally seeing the situation without the distortions of guilt and insecurity. And now? Now I understand you were right last night. I can't let fear of complications determine my choices. A pause. Halin, can I see you tonight? There's something I need to do and I'd like you to be with me. What kind of thing? The kind I should have done a long time ago. 3 hours later, Halin was in Gavin's apartment, a modern and minimalist space that contrasted with the owner's warm personality, except for the books scattered everywhere and the lush plants in every corner. Fibonacci greeted her by rubbing against her legs before returning to his favorite position, on top of the computer keyboard. "He likes you," observed Gavin, serving wine. "Fibonacci is very selective with his approvals. Good to know I have the feline consultant's support." Gavin laughed, but she could see he was nervous about something. He paced around the room with contained energy, as if preparing for something important. "Gavin," she said softly, "what do you need to do?" He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "I need to confront Charlotte, officially, publicly, definitively." He took a deep breath. "And I want you to be there when I do it." Epilogue. 6 months later, Halin was in the front row of the launch event for the Maxwell Foundation for Digital Education, watching Gavin on stage as he explained to an audience of 200 people how technology could democratize access to knowledge. He wore a new suit. He still wasn't completely comfortable with fashionable clothes, but had stopped hiding behind antiquated ties and spoke with a confidence she had rarely seen before. "Education shouldn't be a privilege," he said, gesticulating with that characteristic animation. "And if we can use technology to break down barriers instead of creating new ones, maybe we can build a world where intelligence is more important than origin." The audience applauded, and Halin felt a pang of pride that surprised her with its intensity. "He's doing well," murmured Marcus, who was sitting beside her. "Much better than the first time he tried to speak in public." First time? 3 months ago, at a smaller conference. He was so nervous he started reciting the Fibonacci sequence when he forgot what he was going to say. Halin laughed quietly. "And how do you know this?" "Because I was there. Someone had to make sure my best friend wasn't getting involved with a complete social disaster." "And what was the verdict?" Marcus looked at her with that mischievous smile she had known for years. "That he's perfect for you precisely because he's a social disaster. You two are weird in complementary ways." On stage, Gavin was finishing his presentation. "Before closing," he said, "I'd like to thank some people who made this project possible." He looked directly at Halin, "Especially the journalist who first wrote about our foundation and who has since been, well, has been the person who reminds me every day that it's worth trying to make a difference, even when, especially when, things get complicated." Oh my God, he's not going to. "Halin Zimmerman," continued Gavin, with that crooked smile that still completely disarmed her. "You changed not only this foundation, but changed the way I see everything, especially how I see myself." The entire audience turned to look at her, and Halin felt her face heat up. But before she could be completely mortified, Gavin added, "And I'd also like to thank Fibonacci, my cat, who constantly sabotages my video conferences, but never my important projects." The audience laughed, the tension broke, and Halin remembered why she had fallen in love with that strange and wonderful man who could be vulnerable and funny at the same time. After the event, they went to the same cafe at the gallery where they had their first real date. The difference was that now Gavin didn't look at the abstract paintings with suspicion. In fact, he had started developing his own opinions about art, most of them hilariously technical. "That one there," he said, pointing to a colorful canvas, Reminds me of a poorly organized flowchart. Romantic as always, murmured Hallen, but she was smiling. Speaking of romantic, Gavin suddenly became serious. There's something I want to give you. He took a small box out of his pocket, and for a moment, Hallen felt her heart race. But when she opened it, it was a flash drive. It's, she began, confused. The first version of the Foundation's educational algorithm. I wanted you to have a copy because you've been part of creating it from the beginning. It was possibly the weirdest and most perfect gift she had ever received. Gavin Maxwell, she said, you are officially the strangest person I know. Is that good or bad? Considering him completely in love with you, I'd say it's perfect. They kissed right there, in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by conceptual art and tourists taking photos. And for the first time in her life, Hallen didn't care one bit who was watching. 3 months later, she published a column in Perspectives magazine titled How to Fall in Love with a Human Algorithm. It was the story of an unlikely love that began with a bad joke about artificial intelligence and developed through epic battles with manipulative ex-fiancés, meddling grandmothers, and a cat named Fibonacci who had very firm opinions about video conferences. The column ended like this. Sometimes love doesn't arrive as we expect, tall, dark, charming, and with simple stories. Sometimes it arrives gangly, wearing weird clothes, making jokes about math, and carrying more emotional baggage than an international airport. But if you give the unexpected a chance, you might discover that true beauty isn't in meeting anyone's standards. It's in finding someone who sees you exactly as you are and decides that's enough. That's everything. The column went viral, was republished in 3 other outlets, and earned Hallen a proposal to write a book about modern relationships. She declined the proposal. She was too busy living her own love story to have time to write about others. And every morning, when she woke up in the apartment she now shared with Gavin and Fibonacci and heard him humming off-key while making coffee, Hallen remembered that not every love story needed to make sense to everyone. It only needed to make sense to the people living it.